I want to move on to Rick out of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I want, perhaps, but I will. Rick, you're you say the atheist worldview, the world is stunting scientific progress. I don't know what the heck that means. How is atheism stunting scientific progress?
Well, because if the atheistic worldview of evolution and such, they tend to eliminate all opposing thought by firing all the opposing scientists. And then you guys turn around and say, well, that's not science, right? Like that's the atheist thing, especially Aaron Roffer. He always says that they're not scientists because they don't believe what I believe, right? And that's what you guys do.
Rick, I would argue that if you're not employing the scientific method to solve a particular problem, then you're doing something else. And if you're using the Bible to solve or to address the problem of the origin of life or changes in allele frequencies over time or biological, stuff, if you're using the Bible to do that, then you're a preacher. Just get yourself a church and go preach it to a bunch of people. But if you want to be in a scientific journal, you got to do science, friend, right?
Yeah, so if you criticize evolution, you consider that a creationist position, or is that good science?
Let me tell you something about the scientific process. I'm not a scientist, but I will say this, that do you know how scientists do their job? Do you know how they do that?
I have an idea, yeah.
Give us the idea. What's your idea? I'd love to hear what the idea is.
Well, they use the scientific methods. They use the tools that are available.
That's the critical part.
And they do it. They look at a theory that they have evidence for, and then they attempt to disprove the theory. And if the theory stands at the end, then you move it up in the ladder to the closest thing to a scientific fact, right? That's how good science works. But when you get criticizing those ideas,
Rick, I think you just kind of jumped way over. I think that a lot of people think that the scientific process is in a way is like the Marvel Universe version of scientific discovery. Like Tony Stark wants to invent a new element so he can power his super suit. So he just spends some time in the lab, blood, sweat, and tears.
Or cave.
Yeah, and maybe like actually playing on the radio. I don't know.
Yeah.
And or whatever, and then it gets done. That's not how it works. You say they try to disprove a scientific theory. I think that might be like what might happen well down the road. I think what they're working on is hypotheses, right? They're working on tiny stuff, right? The minuscule operations in the way that the universe works, in the way that the material world operates. They're not they don't sit down at their science desk and say, well, I'm just going to disprove the theory of gravity and Newtonian physics today. That's not how it works.
Went to the lab, did a science,
getting my Nobel Prize. That's not right,
Rick? Johnny, if we lived in a world where
Rick, answer my question. That's not how it works, right, Rick? Yes or no?
Okay, sorry, can you repeat it quickly? Paraphrase?
They don't sit down at their desk to do a science and disprove a major theory of science. That's not how science works, right?
Yes, they do in the lab, not at a desk. But yeah, their attempt is to disprove the theories so that they can move on.
The theories.
Point.
The theories. Okay. So they're just shooting. They're just aiming for They're shooting for the moon, and if they miss, they fall among the stars. Is it like that, or is it much more minuscule, Rick? Is it much more focused, Rick?
You're talking about on the hypothesis level. I'm talking about on the evolution theory. It should be holes should be poked into that theory. We use that as a basis for everything now. Every discovery is attributed to that. And
But
they
I,
haven't
I
even
think you're
got past
missing the
point
point of Johnny's point. I'm sorry to talk over you and interrupt here, but fundamentally, he's trying to encourage you to realize that there is no big boardroom in which all of the scientists get together and say, well, what's the science for this year, guys? It is tiny little incremental explorations of incredibly insignificant seeming things that we then sort of stack up. There is no review board that says, yes, evolution. You guys are still cool with that one? Yeah, let's stick with it. It doesn't work like that. It starts on the tiniest little level. And so this, wide spread conspiracy that we are trying to like prevent good Christian research from making it to the surface is just not how any of this operates.
No, but it is that way though, because when you oppose when you get rid of opposing thought, you are doing exactly what you just described, that very thing. And evolution, it has so many holes in it, and like I said, everything's based on it. If you really examine the evidence, I used to believe in evolution. I used to attribute it to the Bible. Creationists don't have to eliminate evolution. I worked it into my theology. But after examining it all and calling you guys, it's a crock, man. And everybody speaks against
Rick, you examined it all, Rick.
You examined
all of the evolution, Rick.
How do you have time to call?
Do you hear that? Do you hear that? Do you hear that notion? Sincerely, like I'm not trying to like mic drop you. I'm not trying to insult you. I really want you to stop and think about the idea that you have examined all of the evolution. And I'm not just trying to play with words. Think about that. Think about the doctorates that you don't have. Think about the books that you haven't read. I'm not saying I have read all of those books. Certainly nobody has. And that's the point, right? That it's big.
Yeah, but
right?
think about all the fossil bones they don't have, but they pretend they have. Or think about the 98% DNA shared with chimps that isn't true. It's similarity in the DNAs. There's probably 60% actual shared DNA that we have with chimps if you examine it all.
I'm so curious where you get that number from, but I don't see this leading anywhere productive. Johnny, do you have more here? All right, Rick, I believe it's you and me. Do you have any sort of final thoughts for me here? Because I am trying to interact with you on some of these things. I'm trying to peel back the onion, and it feels like you're looking at this sort of widespread, gigantic, persecutorial conspiracy, and I'm just not there with you because I've seen all of the little steps that lead up to these bigger things, and they just don't look the way that you describe them.
Okay, to prove my point, I mean, we just witnessed tens of millions of scientists and professionals globally get fired because they didn't follow what atheistic called science. We just watched that happen globally, except the fast food employees, right? Because that's logical. They get to keep their jobs. Right?
Wow.
That's the point. Everything that goes against the grain of secular science is eliminated. That's not the way science works.
You're right. That is very much not how science works. So I'm glad that we are on the same page about that. I'm glad that we understand the scientific method. I would maybe encourage you to examine your sources on some of your data points and to recognize that this is not some grand conspiracy against Christianity. This is tiny little people all over the world making tiny little contributions to this gigantic thing that we call science, and that doesn't have a voice. That doesn't have a perspective. It doesn't have a viewpoint or a philosophy. It's a collection of data points.
Rick, do you feel that your Christian worldview is persecuted?
I mean, Christians are persecuted globally. Do I feel like I'm personally persecuted? I mean, as far as what just happened, people losing their jobs, but that wasn't just Christian people. But yeah, I do think Christians are persecuted a lot more than you guys are. I think you guys own this world.
Is that right?
This is your world. It's not ours. You're on Satan's side.
Oh my goodness.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're just brainwashed into the left-wing ideology. You don't see it, but you're not oppressed. You guys are freer than anyone in this world.
Tell me some of the left-wing ideology. I'd love to hear more about it from your perspective.
left-wing ideology.
Yeah. Tell me more about it.
Basically
You seem to know a lot about it.
The left-wing ideology pushes your ideology on everybody else, and then you claim victim. That's pretty much left-wing in a nutshell.
What are we
Right?
pushing?
You guys own everything. You guys riot in the street while pastors get arrested for going outside. Everybody got locked down on COVID except for you guys. You guys do whatever you want, right? You guys are not oppressed. You're free. Absolutely. You know it's right.
Have you been following the decisions of the Supreme Court in the last couple of years?
What, because you can't do baby sacrifices, man? Like, stop having random sex with people. You just promoted random sex.
Have you been following the Supreme Court decisions
lately
with regard? Oh my goodness, Rick, you know what? Let me mute you. I'm not hanging up on you, but folks out there in the audience, there's a phrase: never let him see you sweat. Rick is the reason why you never let them see you sweat, because it's kind of embarrassing. So, Rick, I'm going to let you cool down, and I'm going to explain what I mean when I say Supreme Court decisions recently. Up until this point, there was Supreme Court case law suggesting that it doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are, that there are certain standards that must be met in order for you to be allowed to practice your religious faith in certain ways. An example of this would have been, some time ago, about like peyote, or different religious groups use illegal drugs to as part of their religious ceremonies. Okay. And it didn't matter that their faith required them to do that, or that was a key elemental, aspect of their religious faith. The fact was, peyote and different kinds of drugs were against the law for other reasons, right? And therefore, you couldn't do it. But in recent times, Rick, there have been some Supreme Court decisions that would suggest that even though there was what has been designated as like a public emergency with regard to COVID and what have you, if there was a sincerely held, and I don't know who determines this, a sincerely held religious belief that has a component where you have to gather together, okay? And I don't have the case law memorized, nor do I have the case name memorized. This is not difficult to find. This is all over the news. But the law now is that if it actually affects religious people's faith, you can't make a restriction on it. And I'm really dumbing it down, because it's much more sophisticated than that, and it's much more nuanced. But in essence, Rick, the Supreme Court is more conservative than it's been in a long time. And I'm not talking about, as you might call it, killing babies. I'm talking about carve-outs for religious beliefs, sort of carving them out from other obligations that the rest of society is forced to follow. Now, you might think that that's dynamite, and I'm not sure if you do, but I'm going to tell you something, that the numbers aren't looking good for whatever particular superstition you may believe in. Numbers are slowing down and are starting to decrease. And at some point, Christianity and the Levantic religions may start becoming the minority, and other religions whose tenets you're not comfortable with may start taking over, demographically speaking. And it's going to be at that time that you, Rick, and others like you, Rick, are going to be wishing that the separation of church and state wall were robust and protective. But at this time, maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. But I'm going to unmute you. I'm talking about that, okay? I'm not talking about whatever emotional issue you want to talk about. Let's talk about that, okay? So go ahead. You're unmuted, Rick. I hope you were listening. What are your thoughts on that, Rick? Rick, it better be about what I'm talking about, because if it's not, I'm going to have to let you go.
It is. So quickly, I just want to say that Jesus predicted that would happen. So when we get to that point, it's fine. Second of all,
wait, hold on, Rick, you're going to have to be muted. No. And see, that's the thing. You did the thing that I guess I didn't. I told you not to do. I told you to address this point, and you decided to preach.
There was an agreement. Yeah.
There was an agreement. It's conditional, much like God's love. And so I'm going to go ahead and drop you, Rick, and you can go ahead and call back some other time.